from my perspective, no, I think it was a really good overview, and it kind of I think it echoes something I tell people all the time. I think 2024 is the best time to be a lawyer
Mm,
ever. I think
I love
2025
that.
is gonna be a
Oh,
better time to be a lawyer. I think that,
I love that.
and it's not
yeah.
about like ditching what's the old for the new. It's adding new options. You have
Hmm.
the traditional model, and that works for a lot of people, but
Right.
you also now have a thousand other ways to
Right.
do
Right.
lawyering, right? And lawyering adjacent work. And
Right.
Mm.
I think that's
Yeah.
really cool.
Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Law. Our goal here is really straightforward. We want to help create a better law experience for attorneys around the country, around the world, even in outer space. If there's anyone listening in outer space who's licensed to practice law, we really need to have you on as a guest. Today, we're really fortunate to be joined by Kyle Robisch, who's with Latitude, and really excited to learn more about his story, his origins in big law and great experience that he had there, as well as some of the new things that he's doing that are creating some really exciting and interesting new options for attorneys. For those that have listened before, we've got sort of three main principles that we talk about a lot on this show, which is that so often the traditional approach to law is broken and it's breaking people, and so it's time to break free. But we want to really be intentional about diving into some of the nuance around that, because there's certainly folks that are in the traditional model that really thrive there, and so we want to make sure to highlight that as well, and make sure that that doesn't get lost in honestly my confirmation bias, if I'm being completely honest. So, with that, Kyle, why don't you tell us more about yourself, and then we'll have Ashlyn introduce herself to those that are new to the audience as well.
Yeah, excited to be here. I think what y'all are up to is really cool. And I also appreciate that you guys are tackling the nuances around all of this, right? Because as you mentioned, there's good and bad experiences in big law, good and bad experiences in small law, good and bad experiences in house. And it's
Mm-hmm.
all about, I think, giving people optionality in their careers and their lives.
Yeah.
So I think my career is a good example of that. So the short version of that, I went to UF undergrad, Vandy for law school. That was because I wanted to go to DC. I always wanted to practice at a large law firm. I thought I was going to do that forever. And so after I graduated, I clerked for a federal judge in Orlando, and then joined the law firm I was a summer associate at, Venable. I was there for 4 years in DC, and it was amazing. I loved it. And we'll talk more about, like, it's not that simple, right? There were
Mm-hmm.
hard moments, trying moments, but overall, I look back and I feel very positive about that experience. I still have close friends from my time there. And then we got ready to have a family, and so the plan changed in a way I had not anticipated, and so we moved to Florida to be closer to family and friends. We were getting ready for the birth of our first son, or our first kid, who is a son. And that was right before COVID, so it was a bumpy move. I lateral from a really big law firm to a still pretty big but not quite as big law firm, Bradley, and I started on March 30th, 2020. And so I didn't meet any of my colleagues in person for about a year, but the firm was really good about that, and so did that for 3 years, 2.5. Made partner at the firm, which again was always part of the plan. And then a funny thing happened as I was doing my partner thing. This opportunity to open up the Tampa office of Latitude, this flex legal talent company, kind of came through my door, and it wasn't something I was thinking about. And initially, I was very unreceptive to it, but after some pushing from my wife and some other people, I opened my mind a little bit, and now it's been about 6 months as the president and partner for Latitude Tampa Bay, and it's been really, really cool. But the punchline I always tell people from that story is I knew from high school I wanted to be a lawyer. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer in DC doing what I did. And I did it. And then I went to Florida and I did another version of that same thing. And then 10 years in, something just kind of changed. And I said, I think I want to do something a little different, in a way I never anticipated. And so even when you think you know what the plan is, even when you go do the things you say you're going to do in your plan, it's okay for that to change, and it's okay to be open to new doors and opportunities, even if that's scary. Which, if you're like me, as a risk-averse litigator by training, it's very, very scary.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
relatable, Kyle.
No, that's great. Let's dive into that here in just a minute. Ashlyn, for folks that are new, why don't you introduce yourself real quickly, and then we'll circle back to some more on Kyle's story there.
Okay, well, I'm a lawyer and a litigator, so I've never done anything quickly, but I will absolutely try. My name is Ashlyn Lindskog. I too am an attorney, and I like to say that I'm a recovering perfectionist in that I wanted to stop. I wanted to experience my life instead of trying to make my life into what I thought it was supposed to look like, or what sort of, like Kyle, like what you're saying. Like I did the thing the step after the next step after the next step, and then one day I was like, wait, I don't have to follow these steps anymore if I don't want to, if I'm different. So I'm different, and I've had a lot of fun figuring out what that looks like and chatting about it with Sam. And I'm just stoked to keep having these conversations, Kyle, and I'm stoked that you're here. And I have so many thoughts and questions. So that's enough about me for now. I'll make it more about me later, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Kyle, I want to dive into your story a little bit more, and I want to start with one of the things you just talked about was that you had this plan, that you were executing on of, hey, this is what I want my life to look like. I'm going to go into big law, then I'm going to work my way to partner, and I'm going to keep that progression going. And then things changed. What was that process like for you of realizing that, hey, maybe that plan that I have doesn't work best for me right now?
It's a good question, Sam. And I think the foundation for it is, look, I mean, I was the typical type A kid in high school and in college and in law school, right? So the traditional model that we're talking about, I think, lays
Mm-hmm.
out the path pretty simply.
Right.
Simply in the sense of like you see what the check boxes are. It's not simple. But
Mm-hmm.
so I did those things, right? Go to law school, go to a good law school, do a federal clerkship. I'm a litigator, right? So had to do that. Work at a AmLaw 100 law firm, go to an AmLaw 200 law firm, make partner. And so I did those things. And I wouldn't change any of the things that I did. And I mean that very sincerely. They are why I'm here today, including in this opportunity. But somewhere along the line, I started feeling like litigation might not have been perfect for me, right? I thought it was since high school. I was a debater. I debated in college. I coached debate in law school. And litigation in a lot of ways is like debate, policy debate. And so as I moved up in my career, then when I got closer to like, being partner and then being partner, actually being partner and doing more administrative things and talking about the business side of decisions with clients and my law partners, I was like, I really like this stuff. And this light bulb went off. I was like, I really like my firm. I really like the people that I'm working with, but I don't know that the work is my best calling. I'm fighting and I'm breaking and I'm good at it, at least in a general sense as a litigator. But I think I am more called to this collaborative, building, convening, connecting type of role. And I'm getting to do a little more of it as a partner at a law firm, and that's cool. But I'd love to have a role where that is the primary task. And as I was starting to have these thoughts, this opportunity with Latitude came through, and that was exactly the job title, right? Build from scratch the Tampa office of this company. Find clients, law firms, and in-house legal departments. Find attorneys who want to practice a little differently. Build it from scratch. You'll do it from support with a place of support, right? We've been doing it for 10 years. There's 10 other markets. You're not getting thrown in by yourself, but you have the ability to build something from scratch with a team from scratch and do things the kind of the way you want as you're doing that, right? And so uh, that's really, really cool. And I can see that now 6 months in, right? When I started, I was like, oh my God, I'm making a massive mistake.
Mhm.
But now I'm like, maybe I'm still making a massive mistake, but at least I'm having a lot of fun as I'm making a
Yeah,
mistake.
that's I'm
Yeah.
5 years into
I,
my law firm experience, and I feel exactly that still. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. We'll see if it's a
yeah.
mistake when it's
Yeah.
done.
That's a question for
Right.
tomorrow, Kyle.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. That's great. Follow-up question on that. Where I feel like a lot of people get stuck in a traditional model or any model that's not a good fit for them. I feel like it's so much of their plan gets wrapped up in their identity. And it becomes
Yep.
such a personal cornerstone of, hey, who I am is I'm a big law attorney, or I'm a rebel on the outside, or I'm an in-house person, or whatever that is. And it makes it so much more difficult, I think, for folks sometimes to be an observer of their own life and make those, just notice those things like, hey, this isn't working well for me right now, or what I'm wanting, what I'm realizing I'm best at is changing and it's different than what I expected. And so they have a lot of difficulty because of that sort of cognitive dissonance or that identity conflict that comes into play. And then they get stuck. They start suppressing that, pushing it off to the side, trying to deny those conversations from themselves, and then they never really take any action on it, and it just kind of keeps building up. And I think that's part of what creates so many mental health challenges in our industry, is that people are constantly at war with themselves, while being in a very high stress, high pressure situation. When you started to realize, hey, this is something that I like all of these other things, maybe there's another opportunity for me that might be a better fit for what I want to do and where I'm at in life. Was that a process that was difficult for you in those ways, or did it just kind of become a natural, a natural extension of yourself? What was that like from a very personal side of things?
I mean, as you were saying those things, Sam, you literally were tracking sort of my internal process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. Before this session today, you mentioned, we talked a little bit about like what better law is and what that looks like. And I think for me, you just hit on it. And it's creating a version of lawyering where you're more than a lawyer, because we're all more than lawyers.
Mm,
Now, we're lawyers, right? And that doesn't mean we should ignore that. That's an important thing. We spend a lot of time doing it. We're doing important work for people who need it, right? And companies that need it. But we're more than lawyers. And I think maybe this is just self-selection bias because I'm always around lawyers, right? But it feels like we as a profession kind of suppress the other sides of our identity, and we lead with the lawyering part, right? And
mm-hmm.
kind of push down other things, even though we care about them. And I think that's what I love. One of the things I love about this job, Latitude, we create space for attorneys who kind of want to lean into that, right? Like they are lawyers and they want to keep lawyering and doing it at a very high level, but they also want to create space for other things in their life, space that either they need, like maybe they're caregivers to children with special needs or to ailing parents, or just preferences. Maybe they want to lean into other things in their lives, right? They want to start a travel agency on the side. That's an actual example of a Latitude attorney. My point being, whatever that looks like for you, we can kind of help folks find something that allows them to become their fuller selves, while also still practicing at a really high level. And I think whether you do it through Latitude or you do it through a law firm or you do it in house, I think it's something we should all become better at, which is being open about the other things in our lives that matter and the challenges that come with this career and balancing and integrating those other things in our lives. And if I can close with one story, I always reflect on this story, and it's maybe my favorite, like, big law can be pretty cool sometimes story. I was a rising 2L at Vandy and walked into OCI with Venable, and I was sitting down with Ed Boyle, who was the chair. He was either the managing partner of the New York office of Venable, big deal, or he was in charge of the litigation group. I don't remember. It was 12 years ago. But I do remember this. I walk in, and before I even sit down, for my 15-minute OCI session, he says, "Who are you drafting?" The hell was this guy talking about? Like, I'm sorry. And he goes, "Who are you drafting? You have here on your resume that you like fantasy football. And I'm just curious, like, what is your draft strategy this year?" And I was like, oh, okay. And so for the next 3 to 5 minutes, we started talking about Megatron. This was obviously a while ago, right? But like talking about fantasy football. And then that led into a wonderful 20-minute conversation that led to a callback, that led to a summer associateship, that led to 4 years at a place that I really liked being. But the reason I had the warm fuzzies and the excitement from the beginning was he led with, "Let's talk about you and something that's interesting to you," right?
Yeah.
And that
Right.
just, man, I tell that story to everyone I possibly can, because I think from the law firm side, it's what we should be doing, right?
Yep.
Exploring the whole lawyer, the whole candidate.
Right.
And then from the personal side, don't be afraid to lean into who you are, because we are all people and we want to
Right.
be around other people we like being around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an important recruiting sort of a mechanism to sort of put, get to know the person. This job, you have to be obviously, smart and have certain skill sets to do, but you can do it. A lot of people can do it well. Not a lot of people can do it well at that level, and it takes, personality and I think that's how you dig in. And you've said so many things that I totally relate to, just even experience wise, sort of my experience and track. But one of the things that I wanted to touch base with you on is I think it's so interesting. Sam and I talk about this a lot, and I wonder if it is your experience too. But from my experience, I grew up where we're in Wichita, it's big law, but in the grand scheme of the world, it's probably more mid law. But I grew up at a firm, sort of similar experience to you. My 1L clerkship interview, I walked in, I made fun of the interviewer's tie, and we joked about that the whole time. It was very easygoing. And then, summers there, and then associateship to partnership at the same firm. And one of the things that I also think can be so hard about divorcing our identity from our careers is that we get engaged in this groupthink that allows law firms, it allows them to be successful. And it is in any industry. And this is not particular to lawyers. Anywhere that you work, right? You all have this groupthink. And what I remember being so afraid of is that the groupthink is if you leave here for any reason at all, there goes my headphone. If you leave here for any reason at all, it's because you can't do it, because you can't hang, you can't hack it. And lawyers that leave and either start their own practices or go in-house or do those things, it's because they didn't have the fortitude to be a lifelong partner at a bigger firm. And that was
couldn't hack it.
Yeah, you couldn't hack it. And that's a narrative we told ourselves, so that it was always them and not us. And again, I don't think that's particular to one. I think that's how we protect ourselves, right? It's them, it's not us. But I wonder in your experience too, because I had the same thoughts when I was leaving. I loved the people I worked with. I wasn't, I just needed something different. I had different expectations of myself. But I felt almost like, wait, am I going to be like, are people going to think like I'm a loser lawyer? Like, are people going to be like, wait, she couldn't be a partner at a big fancy law firm and everyone's going to think she's incapable? And like, the reason I bring this up isn't because I'm not, my headphones are not going to stay in while I talk. Is not, sorry, Jason, is not because I think that I have an excellent career now, but it sort of touches on that dynamic of as we grow up in law firms, especially those of us who started there and were raised by big law lawyers, it's hard to separate that plan and ourselves from that plan. Like Sam said, it's hard to not become the big law lawyer. That's, hi, I'm Ashlyn and I'm a lawyer. I'm partnered at a big law firm. And not, hi, I'm Ashlyn and I, like tattoos and punk music or whatever, So I didn't know if that was like a similar experience for you where you're like, hey, I have this successful career, this successful law firm, and I'm a partner and I've hit all these buttons. And, the sort of groupthink dynamic makes it hard to leave, even if even if the choice is the right one. I think it can slow us down a little.
Yeah, I think I've got two things to say on that because it's something I've thought about a lot. And especially thought about as I was leaving both Venable and then Bradley. Because remember, Venable, so I was at this super mega firm at the DC headquarters, practicing at the highest level.
Right.
Depending on how you're defining that, right?
Right.
And then going to like Tampa, this like smaller market, still a pretty big law firm, but definitely smaller than Venable, right? So like my now is could I just not hack it in DC?
Yeah.
And then at Bradley, I go from having made partner a year and a half ago to this flex legal talent thing. I'm not even practicing law anymore, right? Am I just some washed up loser?
Right.
And so I was telling myself these things before I told anyone else what I was even doing, right? And this is absolutely something I struggled with. Legitimately, can I hack it? Am I leaving because I can't hack it? Do I think others are going to think that I'm leaving because I can't hack it? And it was really hard for me to get over that. It's gotten a little easier over time, so it was much easier. It's still not easy, but it was easier the second time. That's because I'm in a different place in my life. I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and so for me, the calculus still was some of that, but was now mostly if this doesn't work, what do I do? Because I've got a family to provide for, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's fine if I fall on my face. I'm actually okay with trying it and not happening. Um, but can I go back to work? People think that
Yeah.
I couldn't litigate anymore, so I'm not going to be able to go make a living for my family. I learned that probably was not the case, but let's
Yeah.
check back in 5 years. But so I've had the personal struggle, but in my case, and I have a theory as to why this is true, but in my case, I only had one person say that to me combined at Venable and Bradley. One person out of maybe what 50 to 100 that I had personal conversations with about, which
Yeah.
I thought the number would be 20-30%, right? Maybe that was my own self-doubt. And I that was amazing. I was so happy. I mean, I still think about when I went and I sat down and told my mentor at Venable that I was leaving. He said, "Look, I mean, I'm surprised you're killing it, but that's awesome for you. I know you went to UF. Your wife went there. I know you've got family down there. Obviously, we know you're getting ready to welcome a son. That's awesome. Let me know what I can do to help." And I was just like,
Hmm.
oh, what, right? I was terrified of walking into that room. And then at Bradley, to sit down with the managing partner of the office, who was a mentor for me, who opened so many doors and did so many things for me, um, and tell him, hey, I know you guys just made me partner a year and a half ago, but I'm going to leave. I legitimately thought I was going to cry in that conversation. And I also thought, like, is he gonna just be like, well, what are we doing here? Why are you doing this? And
Hmm.
he didn't try to talk me out of it for a second. He said essentially, I love it for you, I hate it for me. And I
Yeah.
was freaking blown away. I mean, oh
Hmm.
Wow.
my God.
Yeah.
Right? Like for this guy who had teed me up, because I was also putting him in a little bit of a tough spot, right? I was the young partner who was supposed to be the commercial litigation guy for this, big firm, but like a 30 or 40 person office of a firm, right? So there was some building around me.
Hmm.
Never tried to talk me out of it and was supportive the entire time. And I think the reason I can say those two things, that was my experience, was going into Venable and Bradley. I was intentional about finding practice groups within those firms and smaller groups of those firms that I felt good about. Like
Yeah.
Mm,
selecting for culture, right? Because
yeah.
Yeah.
at a large law firm, they're not monoliths, right? Usually,
Right.
you have little like ecosystems within each one. And so
Right.
I remember as a summer associate, I turned down an offer at a even bigger, more high-paying firm because the vibe I got was not me. And at Venable, I got
Yeah.
the exact opposite vibe. Same at Bradley. When I lateraled, okay, I can go to a firm like Venable down here, or I can go to this other firm that's still pretty great. And I just really like the vibe and the sense I'm getting here. And so I saw those decisions pay dividends, not financial dividends, well, sometimes, but generally like personal dividends, time and time again.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into that just a little bit more because I think your experience, at least from the conversations that I've had, is more the exception than the rule
Yeah.
when people leave some of these cultures. And I really like that you used the word culture and that you addressed the intentionality that you brought to the table to select a culture that you felt like was a fit for you. And kind of going back to when you talked about, that initial sit down with whoever was interviewing you for, I think it would have been Venable, right? Um, and you had that relational connection. And it sounds like, and I'd love your feedback on this, that you had sort of a good relational dynamic with the firm from that initial moment, kind of all the way through. Hey, I'm going to go do something else that's a better fit for me and my family. Is that what it felt like for you?
It is
Right.
100%.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
do you think? So it seems like, in so many of these big firms, there's so much institutionalized animosity and, toxic cultures are permitted and tolerated. And it sounds like your experience was fairly different, at least in certain respects. From that relational angle, was that just something that was sown so deep in that particular, internal culture and that practice group that you were a part of, or was it, firm wide? What do you think made the difference to have that sort of an experience? That I would imagine made such an impression on you that you were able to kind of, have that positive experience there.
I can't remember who said this. And I'm not just saying that to protect them. I legitimately don't remember. But
Mhm.
at some point during my summer associate process, someone at Venable, a partner, told me we have a low asshole quotient, right? And
Nice.
I was like, when he said that, I was like, oh my God, that is exactly why I chose this place. And I
Mhm.
couldn't put it in this like succinct, funny way, but that
Yeah.
was it, right? And so that sort of selecting for that, looking for that, both at a firm general, like you have a culture of a firm generally, and then you've got a culture of practice groups, right? They can be aligned, they can be misaligned, they can be just kind of generally different. But trying to get as close to my ideal culture fit both times really paid dividends. And I think
Mm,
both times I left money on the table, both times I left a little bit of prestige, if you
right.
will, on the
Yeah.
table. But it was the right decision a
Yeah.
hundred times out of 100. But it did
Right.
require me. I remember, for example, the Venable decision, talking to my mom, right? Because I was a 2L, rising 2L.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, I was talking to my mom about everything. She's like, "Are you sure you want to do this? Like, it's great. I'm really excited you have the opportunity, but this other firm, like, they're going to pay you a good chunk more, and they're even bigger. Are you going to regret that in 5 years?" And I was like,
Mm,
"I don't know. It's not 5 years from now, but I can tell you right here today, I am excited about going to work with these folks." And I
Yeah.
felt a little weird with other people, and I want to trust that gut
right.
feeling and see what happens.
I like, to kind of tie something together here. I feel like one of the things that stands out to me about your story, and I think for some of our listeners, especially those that are early in their careers that are kind of thinking about, how to have a great experience like the one that you've had, is it feels like you were really honest with yourself, throughout about, hey, this is what I want. And
Mhm.
this is what's working for me. And something that I think you've touched on a couple of times that I think is rare in our industry is you weren't afraid to try something new and weren't you were willing to do it even though you knew it might not work out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with is, industry wide, and I certainly experience this on probably a daily basis, is this concern about, hey, what happens if things don't work out?
Yeah.
And this fear that, hey, I'm going to fall on my face, and nobody's going to hire me, the firm's going to fire me, whatever it is, and so then they just don't do anything, and then they remain stuck in a place where they're like, hey, I don't want to be here anymore.
Mm.
And that just creates so many toxic outcomes over time. But I really like that. I mean, I feel like that's a thread throughout your story, is that, being honest with yourself, and then choosing to vote for the experience that you wanted to have, over the experience that maybe others expected for you, and being intentional about, here's what's at the top of my scorecard.
Yeah.
And it's not money, it's not prestige. I mean, those things are on there. They're
But
Yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. They're on there.
Right.
I
right.
just have to order them
Right.
accordingly. And just to one correction though, I have been very afraid, right? Like
Yeah.
I ultimately took the leap and talked myself into it with the support of my wife and
Mhm.
confidants and mentors.
Yeah.
But oh my God, yeah, I was very afraid. I mean, my wife will tell you that, and I wouldn't dispute any of it. When we got ready to move from DC to Tampa, I was not happy. I was legitimately like pretty down on the whole move, right? I was like,
Mhm.
I'm crushing it at Venable. I really like the people I'm working with. Everyone's telling me I'm doing a great job. I can see I'm doing a great job. I like the work a lot, and I'm going from that to like to Tampa.
Mhm.
What am I doing? I am professionally shooting myself in the foot. And so my wife was really smart and wise, as she always is, and was like, "Listen, you have to make the decision. We can stay in DC and build a great life here. We've already proven that to ourselves. But if you think we should go to Florida, we should do that. But I need you to want to make that decision. It needs to be your decision because I don't want there to be regret in a relationship or just generally." And
Mhm.
that was just so wise of her. But it really freed me up to be like, okay, Kyle, is it career first? Was it family first? Is there a version I can do both of these things? And the move ended up being a version where I could do both these things. And obviously, looking back, at Bradley, I wasn't shooting myself in the foot. I mean, honestly, even on paper, right? I think I made partner faster than I would have if I was, still at the big DC law firm. I had a lot more freedom and flexibility to build a real book of business because I was in a smaller market. at a firm that had, expensive rates, but less expensive than Venable in DC. It opened a lot of doors for me doors that I didn't even see when I was making the decision. But when I walked through that door, I saw all these other doors open in front of me. I was like, oh, these are pretty cool. And I didn't even realize they were right here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was scary every time, but so far I haven't regretted getting over that fear and just jumping.
I
Yeah.
think it's so powerful to name that fear too, especially because as lawyers, we're not good. I mean, because what we do for a living is walk into a space and with confidence and we're right and we'll explain how we're right. And when you question how we're right, we'll explain it again. And so in our industry for a long time, we haven't been able to say, I'm scared or this is hard or I don't know
Mm.
how to do that. And I think it's so important in these conversations, Kyle, for people, especially, and it is what it is when I say this, but especially men in our industry to acknowledge like these decisions are hard and they're scary. And I have real human feelings about the choices I'm making. And the other thing that I think is so interesting is, and Sam pointed this out because we've talked about it historically on this podcast a lot, is like the shift in the industry and the culture of having to meet the expectations of the law students as opposed to you either want a job and you work here or you want to be broke. But those are your choices. And now law firms, even the biggest ones, are having to sort of recognize that money isn't at the top of the scorecard for everyone. And it might have been a generation ago, and it might still be for some people in my generation. But we talked to a professor at a law school in Kansas, and they're working on sort of mandatory professional identity formation so that they can have the knowledge that you went in with to say, this is what I want, this is what I expect, these are my priorities, and I'm willing to take less of this to get more of this. And I think it's so important that when we're talking to lawyers, to say, it's okay to you have a little bit of leverage. It's okay if it's not, if the highest paying, most prestigious position isn't the one that vibes with what you're looking for right off the bat. And I remember when I was having the same experience and doing the same thing, I felt so much pressure to choose the option that made it seem like I was the most successful. Like, I don't know why that's such a pressure. No one put it on me. It's sort of an internal pressure I put on myself to like choose the fanciest law firm with the biggest paycheck. And I, for no reason other than it would have checked a box for me. And fortunately that's, not what I did. And I had a different experience, but I think it's important for both law students and practicing lawyers alike to hear that it's okay to set expectations for what you want your experience to look like. And if there are people clearly who can, thrive in a culture that is not the culture that it sounds like the three of us would expect or want. It works for some people. I don't know how, but listen, there are some people who just churn it out there.
Well,
Maybe
look,
there's that
I
inside.
couldn't agree with everything you just said more. I think a key thing too, and this is something I always try to tell younger lawyers, is the first decision you make is where you're going to be. But then when you're there, you're confronted with a bunch of little decisions as you're going along. And the
Yeah.
examples I'm thinking of is like when I was at Venable, I worked super hard. Like I crushed my hours because I was actually enjoying the work. I was comfortable with the fact that I was probably objectively overworking myself by my own, at my own guidance and direction, not asking for help when I should have been a couple of times, right? Because I was loving what I was doing at that moment in my life. But something I always did was take at least one and sometimes two-week vacations a year. And people are always shocked when I tell them this. They're like, what do you mean you were an associate at this gigantic law firm and took 2-week vacations and didn't really work on those vacations very often, if at all? Yeah. I mean, I think I earned it, right? In everyone else's eyes because I was killing it when I was, on the clock. But two, I didn't care. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm telling the people, that need to know, and they're telling me it's fine. But I did it, and it was awesome, and we have some amazing memories from that time, right? But every time we got ready to do one of those things, I had a decision. Be the guy who's off for 2 weeks and is, maybe not so cool and not willing to grind himself to a pulp, or say, who cares? Right? My record stands on its own, and I'm going to do the things for myself that I need
I,
to.
I love that you
That's
did that,
powerful.
Kyle, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. How did that impact either your advancement or the quality of work that you did, the client experience that you were able to create by taking that unplugged time off?
I don't, from where I am sitting and from what I understand, it did not negatively, in my case, impact anything in terms of advancement. My reviews were all good. No one ever told me not to take these trips. In fact, I had more than once partners tell me to stop emailing them when I was on vacation. And I was like, as you can probably tell, like I'm just super wired, type A
Yep.
wired, right?
Yeah.
And so they'd be like, dude, stop it. Like you're in Iceland or like you're in Africa. Go do those things that'll always hear when you're back. And
Yeah.
I think two things made that possible. One, again, I was going back to the selection. I picked a group where I felt like I would get that support from the
Right.
partners, and so I did.
Right.
And then two, I was legitimately friends with my associates, so my fellow associates. And so when I stepped out, they would step in. When they stepped out, I would step in. So we
Yeah.
actually had like a really strong team culture that
Right.
worked out in that way.
Did you feel like, how did you feel like those times off contributed to kind of your family dynamic? So I'll ask that question first, then I've got another one.
I I say so often, I reflect a lot on that time in DC because I enjoyed it
Mm-hmm.
so much, both living in the city as
Mm-hmm.
like a 20 something, right? And then also doing the work that I was doing. But also those trips. And so I always say I wouldn't do anything differently. And
Mm.
those vacations with my wife, we got married in 2015. And so this was 2016 to early 2020. Those were incredibly formative times for our relationship as a couple. For us to be able to go do these really cool, adventurous things. We went to Europe a bunch. We went to safari in Tanzania. We went to Japan. Went to Iceland. For us to do those things together and have that time,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I cannot overstate how big of an impact that had on my overall happiness, but then
Right.
the foundation of our relationship.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Did you ever have any clients that fired you or your firm as a result of taking that time off?
No, I don't think so. If we did, nobody told me, and if I think they would have told me. But again, it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
different dynamic, right? I was a mid-level
Right.
associate at that point.
Yeah.
At a pretty big firm, so plans were put in place when I was gone, so people knew
Mm-hmm.
there was
Yep.
always coverage available from a fellow
Yep.
associate or whoever it might be.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
no, I
I
No,
think,
that's one.
Sam,
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I love the point that you're making, and I think we have a tendency, again, looping myself in, to think that we're more important and needed and
Mm-hmm.
irreplaceable than we think we are. And the world cannot possibly continue to run without us being available at all times and responding to emails within 5 minutes. And there are so many other lawyers in the world. If I don't treat my client and give them 24/7 access, they're going to leave me and go find another lawyer. And I've like lived with that sort of heaviness, and been like, I can't lose this client. I can't be the reason the partner loses this client. And I think it's such a good example and so important to point out, that Kyle, he took off for 2 weeks and no one was mad at him. Man, you could take your
Yeah.
weekend and go to your kid's softball game. It's probably going to be okay.
But I
Um,
did have to. I'm nodding. I was nodding vigorously to those just listening and not watching. Like I very vigorously. I I love that, Ashlyn, because when I did those things, but I still had those doubts and concerns. And the
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
best example is when I left Venable. I was the lead associate on two really massive litigations that I was just loving and eating up. And I left, and I legitimately remember thinking and saying to a couple people like, I'm sorry, I don't know, you're not gonna be able to keep this going without me. And not from like an arrogance perspective, but like maybe a little bit of an arrogance perspective accidentally, right? But like
Yeah.
I'm essential to this. I put so much time and knowledge into this case that no one else was doing at the same time. It's going to be really hard for this to keep moving, and this isn't going to shock you. It kept moving just fine, right?
Yeah, it
It was
does.
Yeah.
all
It's
perfect.
funny.
Same
Right.
thing when I left Bradley. What am I going to do with my
Yeah,
clients? I had a book of business in the six figures and
yeah.
of my own clients, and I was like, well, crap. Am I gonna? Is ever people gonna be mad at me? Are they not gonna be able to be helped? And
Right.
everyone got handed off. Everyone's
Yeah.
happy. Everyone stayed with the firm and they're excited for their new relationship folks that I introduced them to. The people are
Yeah.
excited about having new clients. But I was a little afraid, was the world going to stop? And it didn't even slow down.
Yeah.
It's so important. And Sam and I are both really intentional about this, and creating this culture when we work too. We put, about respecting business hours and respecting people's time and managing all those things, because when you mature in your practice to a place where you can be where, because it doesn't come, I mean, some people have it right out of law school, but when you mature in your practice enough to realize you don't want to work for the type of people who would fire you for taking a vacation, then you have some freedom. And I just even a week ago had a client who, God bless them, they're going through a really tough thing. And so we're moving this litigation along. It's getting priority treatment, all those things. Well, they said, I thought that was done a week ago. And so I responded very gently and said, hey, you're getting the very best we have. This is moving very quickly. You're getting really good care. If it doesn't meet your expectations or match your needs, here are 3 other lawyers that I think you may vibe well with that may just be a better fit, because we are doing, this is the very best we have. And if it's not met, if you're not comfortable or confident in it, and I'll be darned if she didn't immediately respond and say, I'm so pleased. Like, I'm so happy. Don't fire me. And so I think it's like managing how people think they can also treat and talk to their lawyer or the person that works for them. And so I
Right.
think it's so interesting that it's always such an interesting thing to learn. Is one, I'm completely replaceable, frankly. I mean, not in this world. To my children, to my husband, to my family, they cannot. If I left, they are not just gonna be like, well, we'll find another one. But to everyone else in my professional life, frankly, they can do it without me. And they'll find someone that can step into that space. And when I realized that, and I could shift my perspective, I think it was such a game changer for how much stress I carried about unplugging for a vacation. It's so important. I mean, we're not meant to be connected to our work all the time.
I'll agree to disagree on that. No, I'm
Oh
just
yeah,
kidding.
Sam can't. I don't think Sam wants to unplug.
Uh,
He's like, I will unplug. I swear.
yeah, no, I will. I have a couple of points, and then I want to talk about some other stuff on Latitude specifically.
Yes, me too.
But so I'm so pleased to hear about your experience, Kyle, especially with taking time off and taking unplugged time off, and the courage that it took, but also the planning and the intentionality, and the integration with culture. And I think that especially for young attorneys that are looking at, hey, am I in the right spot, with this firm, or they're looking at different options, I really like looking at your experience and the intentionality you started with, which was, hey, I'm going to go pick a great culture that really fits with me and is close enough on the other stuff, but I really need something that's a fit for me. That allowed you to then be in a position to have great relationships with the people around you, that allowed you to, have those kind of experiences where you would know that, hey, I can plan with these people to have, continuity for partners, continuity for clients, and go take this time that's really important for me and my family. And I know that for, our firm, and I'm, constantly kind of trying to beat the drum on this, is that, that time off is critical. I mean, it's critical to your well-being as an individual, which is critical to your ability to continue to provide a high level of service to your clients in a sustainable way. And people that don't take that time often buy the lie that they are capable of continuing to maintain service levels without continuing to replenish their own reserves.
Yeah.
And you can't draw water from an empty bucket. I mean, at some point, there's just nothing left to give. Plus, it's a terrible human experience.
Yeah.
Like, I make this reference often. The ideal for so many people in our industry for so long has been, how quickly can I climb Workaholic Mountain? And they make all this money getting to the top just to realize that their perspective's been wrong and that they're actually at the bottom of a pit. And then they spend all of their money trying to climb out and fix all the things that they broke all along the way, realizing that what they had when they got to the bottom wasn't really what they wanted. And it's a very sobering reality that I think a lot of people need to just understand and connect with. But the intentionality you brought to it, the planning that you brought to it, I think that's the other thing, is that you can plan for success on time off. And I think a lot of people just aren't even thinking about that. Like, oh, I'm worried about this. Like, well, take that worry and do something with it. Clients
Yeah.
need to have responsiveness. That's great. You've got people on your team who have good skills that can take care of those clients. And in an emergency, you can have somebody on your team who's going to know how to get a hold of you, who's going to have the discretion and the wisdom to say, like, this is not actually on fire. It's just hot. Like,
And
I
if
took
we all
two
do it,
months
yeah.
off, January, February of 2023,
uh-huh.
for the birth of my daughter.
Oh, that's
I was
wonderful.
made partner effective January 1st, 2023. So I
Wow.
started my
Love that.
partnership career in a 2-month hole. And if you think that that did not terrify me,
Mm,
oh, I was like, is this the biggest career mistake I could possibly be making?
yeah.
Right. To the firm's credit, everyone's like, yeah, do it, man. Like it's all going to be fine.
No,
Not
that's
one person
awesome.
tried to talk me out of it. But to your point, Sam, the reason it worked is planning.
Right.
July of that year, I was like, hey guys, I'm thinking about doing this to my teammates, my friends, my colleagues.
Hmm.
Can you guys help provide coverage? Want to make sure everyone's
Right.
good, the clients are good, and you're good. And it worked out just fine. Again, you can tell my tendencies. I got an email in mid-January from my managing partner who's like, I thought you were on parental leave. I'm looking at your hours, I'm seeing you working. That doesn't look like a guy who's on parental leave. I'm like, okay, Craig, point well
I love
taken.
Yeah,
that.
I
I
love that.
love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so important. And kudos to you because, and Sam's heard me lament. Sam's heard me talk about this a lot. The way that we move the needle forward on maternity parental leave is by men taking leave when
Mm,
their wives have babies. So
yeah.
then it's not just a
Yeah.
woman issue that is a parent issue. And so thank you for being willing to step out into that space because I mean, I have a lot of male friends who are lawyers and they were like, they got a lot of crap at their firms for taking a week off. The partner's like, well, you're not having the baby. Like, why can't you work? And it's insanity.
Yeah.
But that's thank you for doing that from, someone who's had to take a couple maternity leaves myself. Sam, you said you wanted to talk about Latitude and I want to know all about it. So
Yeah. Kyle, tell us more about, the work that you're doing with Latitude, what you're trying to build and why it really matters for folks, why it's important from kind of a broader perspective.
Yeah, so and I've been learning the last 6 months because if I'm being completely candid, I didn't know what Latitude was or what it did before this job opportunity came through. And so I had to do a lot of due diligence myself, and I think it's really cool. So the phrase we throw around is flex legal talent. You also hear alternative legal service provider. Basically, it means we're not a law firm, but we have a bunch of really skilled lawyers. Most of them have big law experience, boutique firm experience, or in-house experience, and they come to us because they want to work a little differently. What I think is really cool about it is they're working for the same clients. So a big chunk of our clients are law firms, AM Law 50 clients of Latitude, all the way down to solo shops and then everyone in between, and then a bunch of companies, Fortune 20 companies, thinking earlier this week, to single GC startups and some companies that don't have GCs and use us to get sort of fractional help.
yeah, very cool.
So they're working on the same level of sophistication, working on the same kinds of matters and issues. They're just doing it in a way that works a little better for them. And so that can be, and I always tell people, flexible doesn't mean lazy. It means flexible, right? So like we have a lot of attorneys who want to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week on deals and litigations for 6 months or 9 months, and then take time off, right? Or build blocks in, right, as they're working. We have a lot of attorneys who want to consistently work 10, 20, 30 hours a week because they've got consistent other obligations or preferences in their lives that have led them there. All of those things happen, right? And those look very different. But the cool thing about Latitude is we kind of open the door for that to be possible. And so on the attorney side, the Latitude attorney side, you're helping someone figure out how to practice in a way that works for them and what matters to them. And that's really cool. But on the client side, you're kind of doing the same thing, right? Because behind every client is a law firm partner or associate or general counsel who's like, I need help. Someone's going out on leave. I need a really good attorney to step in for my AGC and provide 3 months of strong leave coverage. Or we just had 2 people leave for other opportunities that we're happy for them, but like we need some help while we find a permanent hire. Or like, oh my God, we're dying. We're understaffed in this litigation or understaffed in this deal or these commercial contracts. Help us. And so when I plug that attorney into that opportunity, we're also helping the client attorney get coverage, avoid burnout, restore some balance to themselves and their team. And that is freaking cool. At least I think it's
Yeah.
freaking cool.
No, it
I love
is.
that on either side of what I'm doing on every deal. There's an attorney that's getting something that works for them, and then there's an attorney who's getting some help that they need.
Well, I
It's
love that.
me
No, go
too.
ahead, Ashlyn.
Oh, I just think it's so, I think you're exactly right. It's cool because you get to do what's best for both. Like I'm gonna slot, it's a win. We very rarely have win-wins in this industry, but this is truly, you get to sort of create a win-win. And as you know, someone as a solo practitioner and has used and started using different like contract legal help on different things, it is a game changer. I mean, you're changing lives, frankly, and the ability to not feel like you're by yourself, or knowing, because like someone's like, I have to hire a lawyer. That sounds exhausting and hard. And it doesn't have to be. And so I think it's such an important thing that you're offering. And you said something, I think, before we started, about how, you know, being a lawyer in 2024 is the best time to be a lawyer. And I want you to say that again, mostly because of the work that places like Latitude and firms that are willing to engage with places like Latitude are doing to the industry. I mean, have you seen it be a game changer?
Yeah. And to repeat it, even though I know we got it, I feel so strongly about it. I say it as often as I can. I think it's the best time. 2024 is the best time to be a lawyer in the history of lawyering. I think it's going to be true in 2025 and 2026 and onward, because companies and firms and lawyers are learning they can lean into the things that work for them, right? The setups and the engagements that work for them. And so I have seen it. I've seen the happiness that our lawyers get working for really high end clients, doing really sophisticated work, whatever that means to them, right?
Yeah.
And companies. Early this week, I have a client who's leaving for another job and is interviewing some of our lawyers to step into the trenches while her company finds the next permanent hire, general counsel. And this client was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that this exists. I did not realize that you could bring me people with 20 years of deep industry experience doing exactly what I do, who can step in for 3 months, provide coverage, and then step back out." That is mind blowing to me, but it's an incredible peace of mind to my CEO and the rest of my legal team to know that they're not going to be on an island, right?
Yeah.
And every time I hear that, I'm like, okay, I'm doing something kind of cool.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and sorry, Sam, I swear I'll let you talk. In
No,
like
that's
a
okay.
minute.
I know you won't. No.
I never do. So I told you, Kyle, I like to really make this about me. But I think that's so important because this changes it. If people could know that this is an option, then it's like truly what Sam and I are talking about, better law, but not anti-big law. It's sort of better law in that you can be the type of lawyer who works for Latitude or you know, a flexible legal sort of situation. You could be the kind of lawyer that hires that type of lawyer to help them out when they need it. And better law is finding a fit that is adaptable and works for what the need is, as opposed to the traditional model, which in my experience is, I don't care whether it hurts or not. Get in there and do it anyway. And if you're not going to do it, then you know, are, again, you just can't hack it. And we don't have to hack it. That we don't have hacking it feels stupid. Sam, say other words too, and things.
Other words. Yeah. Yeah.
Good job.
I think that's spot on. I think so much of what the traditional law firm model has gotten wrong is that it hasn't adapted over time.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of where it's stuck, is that it's creating all of this internal friction on an individual level, because it brings so often a one size fits all approach that doesn't really fit anybody very well. And so it's creating lots of withdrawals from, you know, people's personal lives, their well-being, you know, their value to clients, without creating enough deposits, and not taking advantage of the things that are available to us as lawyers in 2024 and beyond. And so often I think that's because of the psychological barriers that we impose that nobody else really values that much. Hey, this is, we're big, we're bad. We're a large law firm. We've got the best talent. We work them really, really hard. All of that stuff, as opposed to thinking about how creatively we can solve client problems.
Yeah.
What I love about your model, Kyle, is the amount of value that it creates for multiple stakeholders involved. You're creating value for clients in a way that improves outcomes for them. You're creating value for individual attorneys, and you're creating value for firms. And I think that's a really cool thing. I think it's a sign that your particular company, but also that model is going to be successful over time. What I'm most intrigued to see as you continue to grow is how well law firms will use your service as they grow, because I think like one of the biggest problems we've observed in the industry is burnout. I mean, burnout is just at epidemic kind of levels and really disastrous to people on an individual level. And when people start burning out, it's really, really bad for the firm, and it's really, really bad for clients. And so for so long, especially, for so long, it's, the model has been, well, hey, we've got more demand for our services. What do? We just make everybody work harder, right? We just make them work more. Well, they've already been getting worked way more than most people probably should, within a healthy level. And I mean, this is a great opportunity to come in and continue to deliver excellent value for clients, take care of those client relationships, retain them at the firm, while not, incurring maybe the added expense for a firm of, hey, we've got to go out and hire somebody now. I don't know how long this demand's going to last. Most of our businesses are up and down, and they're up and down in specific areas. And so you have the opportunity to plug in a flex resource that can take care of a particular need without forcing yourself as a firm into that decision of, hey, I've got to make a long-term commitment to a human being with a family and a lifestyle and everything else, based on something I don't know is going to last. I mean, that puts, I think, a lot of people in this sort of position where it's their barrier to doing anything other than working their people harder, is just exceptionally high. And so I'm really, really excited to see it. I hope you guys are wildly successful. I think it's got a lot of value to bring to the marketplace. And for a lot of lawyers, like you said earlier, there's a lot of people that just want a different kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
In many ways, you're a market maker. You're bringing together the supply and the demand sides in ways that allow people to be creative and optimize their outcomes. And I think that's, I just nerd out on the business model side of stuff. And in part because the business model and the cultural piece are inseparable. You don't have one without the other. And I think that's where a lot of law firms break down is, their culture has become the reflection of their business model. And their business model says, work everybody we have as hard as we possibly can, and brings no creativity to the table on things like this. So I'll end my soapbox segment there.
Oh,
Well, I think I agree, obviously, as I typically do with you two, with everything you're saying, Sam. And I think one of the ultimate testaments to this, and this is to reflect on a point Ashlyn made earlier about, and this is someone else's quote from an article I read, like, today, a lot of times today's associates don't want to be tomorrow's partners. And this is a big law partner who made this comment in one of the law.com articles I read, right? Like, we're self-reflecting, like, we need to make some changes. And I loved seeing that moment of honesty from a person who's in charge, right? Saying, well, we need to change a couple of things to make this work better for the next generation of lawyers. But what's really cool is our clients are, these same law firms, right? There are a lot of, our clients are as varied as you can possibly imagine, but the fact that we have AmLaw 50, 100, 200 law firms, and not just a couple of them as our clients, it's positive to me for two reasons. One, I think it showed the quality of our lawyers. I love that. We have really good lawyers, and I always want people to understand that, like, because you're doing something different doesn't mean bad. Different means different, right?
Yeah.
And two, I think it's a sign of change. We're seeing some tailwinds of change. Law firms are saying, hey, Latitude, our teams are getting burnt out. We might be getting burnt out usually ahead of time. We'd love to prevent that. Can you help us plug in some capacity so our associate can go out on leave, or so this partner has help for this trial and is not doing it by themselves or overburdening somebody.
Yeah.
If decision makers in these, traditional model firms are doing that, I think that probably means we're generally headed in the right direction because people are tapped into what their teams need and want and deserve, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Me
Love it.
too. I'm stoked. I think that's awesome. I think it is a market maker and a game changer. And we can make better law by giving opportunity, the exact opportunities that you're giving, I think is going to give. And what you said about we have really good lawyers, again, that touches on this like innate fear in us to be like, because I'm a lawyer that works for Latitude, I must not have been able to I must be like, this is the only job I could get. When the truth is, in my experience, they're unbelievably talented, skilled lawyers. They just have set boundaries for themselves and their expectations in their life that are different than what historically has been sort of the acceptable good lawyer type of approach, which is, work above all. And I just think it's really cool. I'm stoked to watch and touch base too, because man, I think there's certainly opportunity there. I think for all different types of law firms, especially a solo law firm owner who is spread a little thin between a sick mom and a bunch of young kids and co-hosting a podcast. Very busy over here. We're very busy.
Sounds like my ideal kind of client.
I love it. I love it, Kyle. I'm just stoked to meet you. I love the work that you guys are doing. And just thanks for doing it and being so vulnerable about why you're doing it. And it's just so nice to hear a story about somebody who left Big Law and isn't like, because it sucked. I mean, I'm really encouraged by that because I think it's an important story to share. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you for sharing with us, Kyle. Our closing question for you, we ask all our guests this, is if you could make one suggestion that you would like to see as a part of this broader concept called better law, what would your contribution to that be? What would your suggestion be?
I think I want to draw on something we talked about earlier, and it's the idea of us leaning as companies and firms, but also individuals into all of what we are and not just part of what we are, right? For all the reasons we talked about over the last hour and a half, I think that's so important, right? We're lawyers, but we're not even necessarily lawyers first. Maybe we are, but in close second and third, maybe we're also hockey players and dads and moms and sports fisher people. And like my point being, we always lead with I'm a lawyer, right? And that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that we have a profession that we're proud of, but as companies and as law firms, we need to give people space to tell us more about who they really are and help them protect those things that matter to them. I think it's going to pay dividends. They'll stick around longer. They'll be happier. They'll feel more fulfilled. And then on the individual perspective, it's just you're going to have a much happier, more sustainable career if you make space for whatever those other things are that matter to you. It can be anything. It can be family. It can be video games. It can be hobbies. But making time for that thing in addition to what you're doing, and then leaning into that in your conversations and the way you build your life and daily decisions, it's massive. And I think we need to be more and more intentional about it as a profession. I think we are, but I want to see us continue to ramp that up, that trend up.
Yeah.
Man, I love that. Mic drop.
Me too. Yeah. Okay. Well, we don't even have to interview anybody else. I think that's it. We'll just do that.
Kyle, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing to make our industry better, and just wish you the best of success. And thanks for joining us today.
Likewise, this was a lot of fun. I'm really grateful that you two invited me part of what you're doing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kyle.